Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Visage, or Visage, or however you want to say it. I just realized that I never made any notes about what we did last time, but we essentially finished off the VHS tapes where we learned about a new character, Lewis Taylor, and we kind of put together the story for all the characters throughout the game and some of my hypotheses based on the things that we've been seeing. And with that being said, we are going to jump back in, look for the comic book pages, and that's going to give us kind of the final pieces of the story that we are missing at this point. So let's just get right to it. Um, why does it sound like I'm in a well? Okay, I think there's something going on with the game here. I kind of like the ambience, though, I'm not going to lie. So we are collecting the comic book pages for a comic book known as The Neighbors. So let's first go upstairs, because the comic book is over here in the son's room. So right here. I'm going to turn this off. So this is called The Neighbors, obviously, and it tells a bit of a different take on the story from a different perspective, and it gives us a bit of information that we are missing out on. And there are 4 pages that are missing. Technically more than 4, but 4 that we actually have to go and collect, and you have to collect them in order. And I pointed out the first one, which is right here, early on in the game. And you should get a trophy called The Neighbors for finding the first page of the comic book. And they very specifically spawn in order. And so you have to specifically get that page first. Usually that will trigger a phone call from the neighbor Rose. But it doesn't seem to be doing that. Okay, so we're going to go get the second page, which is in the garage basement transition. Oh no, it took away my, it took away the drippy sounds. Very technical. Oh wait, I'm in the wrong room. Not the basement, the garage basement. Which honestly, I could have just gone downstairs from there. That was stupid. But you're welcome to my life. So that was the first page that was under the door, and the second one is between here and one of these. Okay. Like I said, these are supposed to trigger some dialogue with Rose. If you recall, she called us at the beginning of the game. Let's see if that triggers it. There we go.
Hello again, Dwayne. How are things going over there? Is everything fine? Anything good on TV? If you need some recommendations, I could ask Frank. He sure loves his TV shows. He's either eating, sleeping, or in front of that idiot box. Sometimes a sloppy mixture of all 3. The hardest thing I've ever had to do is wrench the remote controller from his hands. It's the only thing he loves more than me. Probably because of the mute button. I could just go on and on and on and on about things. But look at me talking your ear off. Maybe he's right about that mute button. Just never mind. Dwayne, I'm sorry. I'll let you go now. Talk soon.
So a bit of a different take on her from my first impressions. I remember the first time I saw this, I was watching Darkness play it, and she calls and she says, "Aw, that's so nice. She's thinking about us, because she's our neighbor from across the road." And I was like, when I heard that conversation, I was like, she sounded a bit more edgy there than I was expecting. So the next page we are looking for is in the living room. And I think it's right on the floor. So that by living room, I mean TV room. Um, I don't know if people still say that anymore these days. Living room. And I don't know if they say that in other countries. But you know, we could name the room after what's in it, which is the TV. And there it is. Okay. So that's 3 of 4. Let's check if that triggers any dialogue. There should be one more phone call from her, and we might need to pick up the last page for it. And if I'm timing that right in my mind, or counting that right in my mind, it's she calls before the first page, calls after you pick up the first 2, and then she'll probably call again after the 4th. Okay, so the master bedroom and the girl's bedroom, daughter's bedroom. If you go between those in the closet area, that's what the last one should be. The living room, the TV room, the sitting room, that works too. I don't know. We used to call it the living room, and then I kind of got in the idea of calling it the TV room. And there we are. So we're in the closet. And we are going to come out of the closet here in a second, but not before I tell you that that should get you a second trophy, the neighbor's master, for finding all the neighbor's pages. And I'm coming out of the closet. So we are going to take a trip over to the phone again, because that should trigger a third phone call. Just ignoring it. Yeah, if the TV's in your bedroom, then I guess that can double as a... That's the way mine is, I mean.
She'll take your body, and then she'll take your mind. Dwayne. Oh, Dwayne. The years just pile on, don't they? Time is a funny little bitch. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Time just keeps on ticking. But me, I've wasted enough time in this house. It's time I get out there and live. Speaking of, what all are you up to? Maybe I'll stop by later. Frank's a little busy, and I could use the company.
Oh, I love that. She went from this sweet old lady to what the heck is that? She went from like 0 to 100 in those conversations. Oh man. Okay, so hey, please don't come over. I think we're better off without you. So I noticed the sound is still sounds like we're still in the previous tape. I was waiting for that. Can Lewis walk down stairs? Yes, he can. Yes, he can. Oh God, he's fast. He's fast. Okay. Splat. Splat. Please splat. Okay, he splatted. Oh God, the floor changes behind him too, and he leaves prints. That is so cool. Okay, Celine Lewis, stay up there, please. Oh my God, Lewis, come on. Have a heart, man. Have a heart. I only potentially killed you, okay? That's it. I just killed you. Potentially by drowning you in some sludge or water. Okay? Just, you know, it's not my fault, man. I had to kill you. Remember, that's my hypothesis. Okay, I'm going to look at this because, from my experience, Lewis cannot come after you if you are in this comic book. The house will still mess with you, but Lewis doesn't pop out. So, we've collected all the pages, and there's only one thing left for us to do at this point with them, which is to actually read the comic book. So, that's what we are going to do. Scary stories that we dare you to read. Is that supposed to be like scary stories to tell in the dark? So there's a couple things here. We can hit R1 to show the text here. So if you want to see what it's saying, you can just do this. And it says, she's dead. What in the hell is going on over there? And that's supposed to be Rose. And of course on the left are the creators of this. So let's jump to the first page and see what this is all about. And while we do this, I'm going to kind of go over some notes I made before we do the discussion of the storyline. And so first thing I want to point out here is that the start thing here, and I think darkness for this one, is a cup, like a glass, for water, because that is the overarching theme of this comic book. You'll notice in the game it's been raining constantly since we started. The glass has shown up in the VHS tapes. Water's been a common feature throughout different parts of the story. And of course we know that now why, because of the water treatment plant and how the company organization was putting psychoactive compounds in the water. So we know that's kind of the underlying story behind this now. So let's start. Okay, 1961, Oregon. That's the important part about this. It's giving us a timeline that we do not currently have. Lucy's mom, no. Let me go, that's my baby. That's our child. Oh, Lucy, no. Let's go this way, ma'am. We'll get you a chair and a glass of water. That scared the crap out of me. Thank you, House. That sounds good, right? We've just got a few questions for you. Frank! Oh, sorry. Something happened to the sweet little girl. Okay. Sorry, overdramatic. So we're in Lucy's story with this one. What? She talking to herself again? That girl gives me the heebie-jeebies. She's dead, Frank. Are you listening to me? Lucy's dead. Yeah, I'm listening, Rose. You just gotta see this horse. They call him Ed, and he talks. I don't think that's a real horse. I'm going outside. Okay. A talking horse. Can you believe that? She's already had it up to here with him. Sorry, my bad voice impressions of these. Oh my God, Jesus Christ! Whoa, easy now. It's okay. I'm sorry, we didn't mean to scare you. I'm 52 years old. You're lucky you didn't give me a heart attack. We've already seen enough broken hearts for one night, which is exactly why we're here. This area is under investigation. We ask that you stay in your house until further notice. What happened to Lucy? Are her parents? We're not at liberty to discuss. Yes, it's very confidential. It's so confidential that you came over here to tell her that. Why? Okay. Now, ma'am, I'm telling you one last time. Stay inside until further notice. So your visit over here was completely pointless. Thank you. Okay. The page has been ripped and cannot be read. And all I'm gathering out of this is that her husband is still laughing at the TV and she's drinking more water. Okay, so pan over here, and we're actually at a different part of the story. So before we read this, this is telling us that Lucy died in 1961, and like I said, I'd like to point out the fact that he said, we'll get you a chair and a glass of water. Common theme here, Frank's being distracted by the TV and ignoring Rose, and he's making commentary on how they knew Lucy was talking to herself. So I thought that was kind of interesting. All right, so 1962, so this is about a year later. The new neighbors have a kid. Just one. Oh, I know. I could never live in a house where someone died. Rose, how much longer? I'm starving. Don't make me eat this goddamn remote. Let's see. Frank, give me 5 minutes. Dinner's almost... Okay, that's enough. Less talking, more cooking. Wow. Frank, you're an asshole. Frank, okay, that's enough. Let's... Oh, no, it's the same part. Okay. No. Oh, no, we're shifting story here. Okay. Okay, so first part, let's see. That was so they're referring to a couple with a child. So that was referring to Dolores and George. So they must have moved into the house in 1962, probably about a year after Lucy died, I'm guessing, or within that time. And Frank's been getting agitated about dinner running late. And so again, the water's a theme. Remember, one of the signs, symptoms of the psychoactive compounds is agitation. So, all right, so let's go here. We have down a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so this is a new story. 1965. So this is 4 years later. So they moved in or no, 3 years later. So they moved in 62. So 63, 64, 65. So Dolores and George must have lived in that house for 3 years. Okay, so a single man, no kids, a big house like that? Well, don't get any funny ideas about our new neighbor. You're stuck in this wonderful and happy marriage. I don't think that's how that works, Frank. Oh, calm down. You know it's not like that. I'm just worried about Lewis. He seems unhappy. And don't tell me you read that and weren't thinking immediately that that was Rakan, because we know Rakan lived in the house. We did not know that Lewis lived in the house. That is news. Single man with no kids, moved into the house in 1965. Lewis seems unhappy, which, we have an inkling from the tapes as to why that might be. And Frank is starting to get jealous. Okay. So, new story. 1970. I wasn't gawking at him. He just seemed like a nice young man. Oh, sure. I heard I heard all about you telling your sister all about your new rugby player neighbor. Admit it. I know you want Rakan. You're always looking for some man to. Oh boy, I tell you. Okay, and she throws a glass at him. It looks like the water glass. Okay, and I think that's it. That's all we got out of that. So, what that's telling us, Rakan moves into the house in 1970, I'm guessing, based on that timeline, because I don't see why they would just jump into the story in the middle. They seem to be telling the end of a story with Lucy and the beginning of a story with everybody else. So Frank's getting jealous again. He's jealous about Lewis. He's jealous about Rakan. And I'm sorry I spoiled this earlier, but that's how I knew Rakan was a rugby player. I forgot that came in later. Rose throws the glass at Frank, so they're both getting agitated with each other. And one thing I want to point out, that gives me another timeline here. Rakan, I'm pretty sure Rakan died in 1967 because there's a hospital ID for a janitor under the name Kyle Schaefer. And this was in the timeline at the hospital when Rakan would have, potentially around the time where Rakan would have been killed. So I think Rakan likely died 5 years after living in this house. So that's why he would have been as agitated as he was in the end. Because I'm assuming he wasn't under sedation for very long. Okay. I think this is our final story. Look at that date. We all know what happened in 1985. Hello, Dwayne. It's Rose, your neighbor. I know it's late. I know I tend to get a little anxious about small things. I apologize for that, but I'm getting a bit worried. I haven't seen you out of the house in about 3 weeks. Is everything all right? Could you call me just to let me know that everything's fine? All right. Bye-bye. Uh-oh. I hear squishies. I hear squishy. Did the PS5 version change the safe spot? Oh my god, that's unsettling. Stop. Okay, anyways, let's not overlook the fact that there's a dead body in the bathtub, okay? Okay, so Dwayne's murder-suicide was in 1985, I'm pretty sure. That's the last day of any of the photos in the house, and it's telling us that's when she called him. So it's been about 3 weeks, she said. And I like to point out that she's sitting over Frank's body in a bathtub with a remote sticking out of his mouth. And she is, did they show it here? She is, let's back up. She's drinking the bloody water from the bathtub. And I also want to point out, right here, to be continued. That really gives me hope. That really gives me hope that the to be continued is not referring to our story. That that they actually had thought about adding on to the game, and we have a nice little ad over here. Spaghetti circles, so neat it's spoonable and practically unspillable. Open wide for tiny spaghetti circles in a bright red sauce made of tomatoes and cheddar cheese. Get a nourishing and hot lunch within minutes. Great for the whole family. Spaghetti circles, and it's in the Olympic symbol formation on the can. Interesting. So we're gonna stay in here because I heard squishy squish sounds, and the house is being aggressive with me right now. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, so that was the comic book. That was The Neighbors. So it's not very long, but it does give us a bit of telling information. Like I said, I had no idea Lewis lived in the house. I didn't know the dates for some of these things. I didn't know when Rakan and the others moved into the house. I didn't know when Lucy died. You can figure out Rakan's death from his chapter. Stop it, house. So, it gives us a bit of information. Alright, now that we have completed everything except the endings, I want to review what we know about the story and explain what I think happened. And I want to emphasize that these are my thoughts, my hypotheses on the game based on what I have dug up, what I've heard other people explain to me. This is my interpretation. It's not, fact based on the game because I don't know what the developers were thinking. Our story begins with Dwayne Anderson, who is working as a chemist in the state of Oregon for an unknown organization. He started working on a project in 1952 where they were synthesizing psychoactive compounds that were being used for the manipulation of unaware test subjects. The psychoactive compounds were being added to the city water supply through Riversdale Water Treatment Plant, and possibly to more specific subjects as medical treatments through the local hospital, which I believe is where Dwayne's lab was. Meanwhile, a family was living in the house that we would come to know so well. Their young daughter, Lucy, started to hear voices through electronic devices such as the radio and TV that coerced her into killing her pet bird Pico. She claimed that her friend was responsible for Pico's death, and her parents started bringing her to the local hospital where she was being treated by an unknown medication. The treatment did nothing but make Lucy become more and more withdrawn, leading her to lock herself in the bathroom where she tore her own jaw off and died in 1961. Bringing us to the comic book. So this goes to the point where Lucy died, and we get to see from the neighbor's perspective. So the neighbor, Rose, watched as Lucy's body was taken away while her husband, Frank, offhandedly comments about Lucy talking to herself as he was distracted by the TV. The police officers even make a point of offering Lucy's mother water, insinuating that the project at the water treatment plant had possibly been in play for some time. I think that Lucy was being treated with the psychoactive compounds and being manipulated by the organization, possibly even Dwayne himself, because we know he's directly involved, and there's a lot of bodies on his head, or on his docket. Shortly after Lucy's death, an older couple, Dolores and George, move into the house in 1962 with their newborn child. Skip ahead a little bit in the story, because this is going over Lucy's. And we are looking at here. At some point, Dolores started showing signs of mental illness, such as auditory hallucinations, mood swings, memory problems, paranoia, and delusions, to name a few. I think that she was misdiagnosed as showing signs of dementia, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorders, noted by her husband George, which likely stemmed from the psychoactive compounds in the city water. Dolores was treated with unknown medications from the local hospital. However, as with Lucy, the medications only seemed to make things worse. I have two hypotheses for what was happening. Dolores was being genuinely treated for mental illness that was misdiagnosed, or she was being experimented on, as with Lucy, explaining why she got worse and why George was not experiencing any profound signs or symptoms at the time. I think the latter is more probable given that Dwayne's laboratory was likely at the hospital, where they also have observation rooms to observe their subjects. I stand by my original hypothesis that the voices Lucy and Dolores were experimental directives to see if the treatments could be used to manipulate people into doing things such as performing tasks or revealing information in an interrogative fashion. If you recall, Dolores was hearing voices through the baby monitor, similar to how Lucy would have heard them from the radio and TV. Again, I think that the organization and possibly Dwayne were behind this. I believe that George started to sedate Dolores with the specialty as she got progressively worse, because he stated that this is the only time that he could work on top of taking care of the baby. Dolores became paranoid that George was trying to poison her with the tea, eventually leading her to stabbing him with 7 kitchen knives and leaving the body in his office where he worked. There is a possibility that George was planning to kill her, but I think that the former to be the more likely. I think Dolores came to realize what she had done to George and hung herself from the attic by dropping into the bedroom in 1965, which brings us to our next story here, leaving the baby to essentially die from neglect. Following the deaths of Dolores and her family, a single man named Lewis moved into the house. Lewis worked at Riversdale Water Treatment Plant, where the psychoactive compounds were being added to the city water supply. The neighbor, Rose, commented that Lewis seemed unhappy, which could suggest that he was already aware of what was happening with the water. I do not know whether Lewis was a member of the organization, but I suspect that he was either a whistleblower, if he was a member, or somehow stumbled onto what they were doing while he worked at the plant. Lewis was likely killed in 1970 by drowning in contaminated water at the water treatment plant, or potentially in some abandoned location such as a well, based on the visuals we've been presented with. He appears to be covered in a blackened oil substance, as we saw earlier, because he's already attacked me once in this episode, and I say once because I might go and provoke him again, and leaves blackened hand and footprints wherever we find him. This could be explained by the water being contaminated with organic byproducts from the synthesis of the psychoactive compounds, or that the dosed water was a representation of how he died. Lewis seemed to fixate on Dwayne, so I suspect that Dwayne may have been to the water treatment plant for his project, and that he could be directly responsible for Lewis's death. And before we continue on this, let's bring us to that point, because I said 1970s where the next story picks up. Let's see if we can actually find the picture in the attic. Yeah, there we go. So you can see how there's a face underneath water and a blackened handprint over it. I think that's Lewis. It could be Dwayne, potentially, but I'm definitely thinking more on the lines of Lewis. And his head's clearly underwater, and if you listen to the painting, you can actually hear a beach, with the implication that, there's water running. I don't know why it's a beach, though, so there could be some more to that I'm not aware of. Okay, so there's another single man, Rakan, that moves into the house around 1970, which is the time we're presented with here. Rakan feared that he was being watched by an organization that was trying to brainwash and subjugate him. Sounds familiar, right? It sounds a lot like the story that we've been talking about at this point already. Rakan lived a minimalistic lifestyle that would have made it difficult for the organization to monitor him, and making it easier for him to find signs of the organization in his house, because he was looking for bugs and things like that. His paranoia grew, and he became more agitated as expected from the psychoactive compounds in the city water. Rakan was eventually attacked by a figure resembling Lewis and opened fire, leading the neighbor, Rose, to call for the police, who found no evidence of an intruder. An interesting note about Rose is that her and Frank seem to be getting more agitated with each other, as we just learned from the comic book, with Frank getting jealous very specifically of the single men, Lewis and Rakan. So they're clearly being affected by this too. Rakan was hospitalized, where he became more agitated and violent, leading to his attempted escape by jumping from the second floor window, where he hurt his legs. And specifically, I do believe he broke both of them when he was on crutches. Hospital personnel commented on a past diagnosis, or diagnoses, I think it was more than one, of scopophobia, and his psychological evaluation led him to being heavily sedated in the high-risk patients area. Rakan played along and feigned recovery until he was able to escape again. However, this time he found an underground observation area that seemed to confirm his original story. He realized too late that there was a man in black standing just outside the room who locked him away, screaming where he would likely die from dehydration. That led us to 1976, which, as I said, I'm pretty sure about that because of the timeline of the badge in the hospital, or at least it's close to that time. If Dwayne was responsible for Lewis's death, and considering Rakan saying that Dwayne ruined his life, I think that Dwayne may have been the one who locked him away, effectively silencing him and protecting him, or himself, and the organization. And there was an observation room in the prison VHS tape that showed very specifically a observation room with figures in black suits behind it, which makes me think that the organization is definitely governmental. So it's a government organization, similar to the MKUltra story, which is, the CIA. I'm not sure when Dwayne and Claire were married, but their son, John Michael, was born around 1972, while Rakan was living in the house. I'm guessing that Dwayne and his family moved in shortly after Rakan died in 1976, and then had their daughter Sarah around 1977. I do not know why Dwayne would have willingly moved into this house, knowing the effect that the water was having on people. But my hypothesis is that he started taking the chlorpromazine to stop the effects. There is an implication that he might have just been taking it for stress, but I like my sciencey aspect of it better. I think it fits better. Dwayne eventually became an alcoholic. Sorry, I should actually point out, this is where it takes us here towards 1985 here. Dwayne eventually became an alcoholic and started to neglect his family life, possibly because of the amount of debt he was responsible for, or because he learned that his wife only married him for his money, or both. Although I do have an alternative hypothesis that Dwayne was being manipulated, similar to our past characters. Consider the idea that the organization owned the house where he and his family lived, and that they may have allowed him to live there to keep an eye on him. And I got this idea from Darkness, and so I'm kind of formulating a kind of a plot here based on that information. So from there, the organization could have pushed him to the murder-suicide that occurred in 1985, which we have here at the bottom and final part of the comic book here, where he killed his family and himself to protect their secrets. Following the murder-suicide, which we're kind of getting into this part right here, and let's go towards the nasty part of this. So, following the murder-suicide, Dwayne awakens in a purgatory of sorts where he can no longer leave the house and where he must face the visage, or visage, of death of those he is responsible for. See what I did there? Sorry, I know that was bad. Going back to the start, we enter the house where we receive a call from his neighbor Rose, which we can see right here. So if we go down to this part, we can see that she has killed her husband, and this dialogue is that phone call. So if you find the comic book pages, you receive more phone calls from Rose, which we already listened to, suggesting that something is wrong, and that the comic book shows that she murdered her husband, Frank. where the TV remote was, as you can see here, shoved into his mouth, and the body is laying in a bathtub of bloody water that Rose is currently drinking from in this situation. And so this is the first phone call we got from her, and then the calls got progressively worse. So they are being impacted by this too, and I think the reason they're not showing the signs and symptoms as badly up until now is because this is taking years to take effect on them. They're not being treated medically by the hospital. They're only being treated through the water, somewhat similar to how Dwayne was until he started to self-medicate. This was the only story that showed what effect the psychoactive compounds in the city water were having on people outside of the house, which I think is very significant, and the house that we are currently trapped in and have been trapped in since the start. Now, Rose initially expressed concern, saying that she hadn't seen Dwayne out of the house in about 3 weeks, and if you go to the front door, you can count over 40 broken keys, showing that it's not for a lack of trying. He's been trying to get out of the house. At the start of the story, I asked, who has 40 plus keys to their own house? And the answer to that is no one does. And that takes us to the endings, which we are going to talk about in the next episode. Let's move to a different room. This is not a good place to be right now, other than the fact that... Thank you, game. As I was about to say, let's get out of here. Let's blow this stand. Let's pop some pills. Dwayne... why not just finish the bottle? We don't need those anymore. We're done. Drop that bottle. We don't need that. We don't need that. Come on. Let's get over here. I'm not going to say safe, but maybe a little bit safer. And that's a good spot to, save, right? So there's no good spot to save. Let's be honest about this. All right. If you are following along for the trophy walkthrough, then you should have the Neighbors for finding the first page of the comic book under the front door, along with the Neighbors Master trophy for finding all 4 pages to the comic book. And that is a good place to end this episode. To recap, we completed the Neighbors comic book where we learned some new information about the timeline of our story, along with some additional information on Lewis and our former neighbors, Rose and Frank. I also went through every piece of story that we have discussed in the past in conjunction with the comic book, so I will stop going on about that for a change. Next time, we are going to tackle the endings of the story and see what lay in wait for our player character, Dwayne Anderson. With that being said, let us close things out for this one. I will be continuing tonight, so if you're here live, stick around. Otherwise, thank you all for joining, and I will see you all later.